It's the smell that gets me. Even now, 20 years later, living 1,000 miles away in a city that smells of nothing but concrete and exhaust fumes. Every once in a while, the passing car will have one of those cheap pine tree air fresheners dangling from the rearview mirror. And for a split second, I'm not on a crowded sidewalk in 2023. I'm back in the humid, oppressive summer of 2003. I'm standing on the damp earth of the Wisconsin Northwoods, and I can smell the real pines, the cloying sweetness of decaying leaves, and the dark, stagnant water of Wapaka Lake. And then, for just a heartbeat, I can hear it, the sound of a child's laughter, thin and hollow, stretching like worn-out elastic over something awful. They tell you time heals all wounds. They're liars. Some wounds don't heal. They just get deeper. They fester, and they whisper. What happened at Camp Wapaka wasn't just a tragedy. It was a stain that soaked into the ground, into the trees, and into every single one of us who survived. And I'm not sure you can ever truly wash it out. My name is Alex, and back then I was just a 19-year-old kid with a shitty car and a desperate need for summer employment that didn't involve frying potatoes. The flyer for Camp Wapaka was tacked to a corkboard in my community college's student union, faded and curling at the edges. Spend your summer under the stars. Counselors needed. Adventure awaits. It had a cheesy hand-drawn picture of a smiling cartoon sun wearing sunglasses over a pristine lake and a perfect A-frame cabin. It was a lie, of course, all of it. But I was 19. And the idea of escaping my parents' beige-colored suburban house for 3 months sounded like the pinnacle of freedom. Adventure, right. The drive up was an exercise in disillusionment. The further north I got, the more the highways gave way to 2-lane country roads, cracked and buckled by brutal winters. The cell signal vanished first, the pixelated bars on my Nokia disappearing one by one until the screen just read, "No service." Then the radio stations dissolved into static, leaving me alone with the rattle and hum of my '92 Civic and my collection of scratch CDs. The trees grew taller, thicker, crowding the road. They weren't the friendly, welcoming trees of a brochure's cartoon. These were ancient pines and stoic oaks, and their branches seemed to claw at the sky, blocking out the sun. It felt like I was driving into a tunnel, a long, green, silent throat. Camp Wapaka wasn't so much a place you arrived at, but one you stumbled upon. There was no grand gate, just a weathered wooden sign, half swallowed by ivy, with the words Camp Wapaka, St. 1922 carved into it. The W had fallen off, so it morbidly read Amp Wapaka. I remember thinking that was funny. I wouldn't be laughing later. The camp itself was a collection of rustic, dark wood cabins huddled around a muddy clearing. At the center of it all was the main lodge, a large 2-story building with a sagging porch and a massive stone chimney that looked like a tombstone. Beyond the clearing, through a curtain of whispering pines, I could see the flat, gray-green expanse of Wapaka Lake. It didn't sparkle. It just sat there, heavy and silent, like a sheet of hammered lead. The air was thick, wet, and alive with the drone of insects. It smelled of damp earth, pine needles, and something else, something vaguely unpleasant, like old wet canvas. I was one of the first counselors to arrive. I parked my car next to a beat-up Ford Ranger and was met on the porch of the main lodge by a man who could only be the camp director. His name was Mr. Abernathy. He was a tall, reedy man in his late 50s with a face full of aggressively cheerful wrinkles and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. His khaki shorts were pulled up a little too high, and his polo shirt had the camp's smiling sun logo on it. It looked faded, almost haunted. "Alex, is it? Welcome, welcome," he boomed, his voice a little too loud for the oppressive quiet. He shook my hand with a grip that was surprisingly strong, almost desperate. "Glad to have you. We're going to have a fantastic summer, the best." His eyes, a pale, watery blue, darted around constantly, never settling on me for more than a second. They flickered towards the tree line, towards the lake, towards the silent, empty cabins. It was the first sign that something was wrong. It was the look of a man who's afraid of his own shadow. Over the next 2 days, the other counselors trickled in. There were about a dozen of us in total, a typical mix of college-age kids. My cabin mates were Liam and Ben. Liam was your quintessential jock, loud, confident, built like a linebacker, and seemingly powered by an inexhaustible supply of bad jokes. He was there to coach sports and, as he'd announced within 5 minutes of meeting me, hook up with a hot counselor. Ben was his opposite, quiet, lanky, with thick glasses and a book always in his hand. He was the camp's designated nature expert, more comfortable with identifying mushroom species than making small talk. The female counselors stayed in the cabins on the other side of the clearing. I got to know them during the orientation sessions Mr. Abernathy held in the dusty, cobweb-draped dining hall. There was Sarah, a sharp, no-nonsense pre-med student who'd been a counselor at other camps before. She was the de facto leader of our group, the one who actually seemed to know what she was doing. And there was Maya. Maya was an art student from Chicago. She had long, dark hair she usually kept in a messy braid, and the most expressive, observant eyes I'd ever seen. She didn't talk much, but when she did, it was thoughtful. She carried a sketchbook with her everywhere, constantly drawing, the twisted branches of an old oak, the way the light hit the dust motes in the dining hall, the nervous tick in Mr. Abernathy's smile. I was, of course, instantly and hopelessly smitten. It was during our orientation that the weirdness really began to surface, layered beneath Abernathy's forced cheerfulness. The rules. Every camp has rules, sure. Don't run with scissors, buddy system for swimming. But Wapaka's rules were different. He handed us each a thin mimeographed pamphlet. Most of it was standard stuff. Then we got to the last page. A few Wapaka-specific traditions, Abernathy said, his smile tightening. Just some things to keep in mind for a smooth summer. He read them aloud. 1. All campers and staff must be in their cabins by 10 p.m. sharp, no exceptions. The woods are not safe at night. Tricky footing, animals, you know. His eyes flickered towards the window. 2. The old chapel on the hill is off limits. It's structurally unsound, a relic from the camp's founding. Just stay away from it. It's not part of the camp property anymore. 3. If you're out on the lake, be back on shore at least an hour before sunset. The weather can turn on a dime, and the currents get unpredictable. Liam snorted. Unpredictable currents? On a lake? Abernathy's gaze snapped to him, and for a fleeting moment, the cheerful mask dropped. His face was cold, hard. Unpredictable, he repeated, his voice low. Then, just as quickly, the smile was back. Safety first, kids. And finally, he said, tapping the last point, campfire songs are great. We love them. But we have a specific songbook. Please, stick to the songs in the book. We don't want the kids learning any inappropriate ditties. Sarah raised her hand. What about other songs, like popular ones, stuff from the radio? The book is best, Abernathy said firmly. It's tradition. It was all said with a veneer of perfect sense, but it felt wrong. The emphasis was too sharp, the explanations too vague. It felt less like a set of rules and more like a list of warnings. Maya was sketching in her book, and I leaned over to see. She wasn't drawing Abernathy. She had drawn the list of rules, but the words were twisted, warped, like they were being seen through water. Next to the rule about the chapel, she'd drawn a steeple that looked like a screaming mouth. The night before the kids were due to arrive, we all sat around a crackling bonfire. Liam was telling some loud, embellished story about his fraternity, and most everyone was laughing, drinking beers they'd smuggled in. The forced camaraderie of new colleagues. I was sitting on a log next to Maya, who was staring into the flames. You think he's weird, right? I asked, keeping my voice low. Abernathy. She nodded, not looking at me. He's scared, she said softly. I don't think he's scared of us. I think he's scared for us. She finally turned her head. her dark eyes reflecting the fire. "What do you think he meant about the songs?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Maybe some old counselor taught the kids a song full of cuss words and he's been trying to live it down ever since." She didn't smile. "No, it's not that." She hugged her knees to her chest. "This place, it feels old. Not the camp, the land. It feels like it's been waiting for a long time." I didn't know what to say to that. I was a business major from the suburbs. I believed in things you could see and touch, balance sheets and profit margins. But sitting there, with the immense, silent darkness of the woods at our backs and the deep black water of the lake just out of sight, I felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the night air. She was right. The place felt like it was holding its breath. The buses arrived the next day, a cloud of dust and diesel fumes and the high-pitched, shrieking joy of 100 boys between the ages of 8 and 12. For a few days, the sheer chaos of it all was enough to push the weirdness to the back of my mind. We were run off our feet, organizing swimming lessons, teaching archery, a terrifying prospect with a dozen hyperactive 10-year-olds, mediating arguments over stolen comic books, and cleaning up messes of every conceivable variety. My cabin was cabin 7, and I was responsible for 8 kids. Most were typical boys, loud, obsessed with video games and gross-out humor. But there was one kid. His name was Thomas. Thomas was small for his age, with pale skin, big, owlish eyes, and a perpetually serious expression. While the other boys were engaged in a non-stop whirlwind of activity, Thomas would sit on his bunk, drawing in a little notebook he'd brought. He never showed anyone his drawings. He was polite, he did what he was told, but he was distant, like he was listening to a conversation no one else could hear.
The other kids mostly left him alone. They called him Spooky Tommy. The first truly strange thing happened about a week in. It was during free swim. Liam was on the lifeguard tower, spinning his whistle and yelling at kids to stop dunking each other. I was on the shore doing a head count. I counted 24 heads bobbing in the murky water. We were supposed to have 25. Abernathy's rule about the buddy system was gospel. We drilled it into them. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through me. I started counting again, my eyes scanning the water frantically. 24. Sarah saw the look on my face and came jogging over. "What's up?" "I'm one short," I said, my voice tight. We did a quick, quiet roll call on the beach, pulling kids out of the water. Every counselor was calling out the names of their cabin members. "Cabin 7, I yelled. "Miller, Green, Davis." They all yelled back. All except one. Thomas. A cold dread settled in my stomach. The lake, the deep, dark, silent lake. Abernathy's strange warning about the currents echoed in my head. "Nobody saw him get out?" I asked the other kids from cabin 7. They all shook their heads. One of them, a freckle-faced kid named Josh, said, "He was right next to me a minute ago. We were looking for cool rocks." We searched. For 10 minutes that felt like 10 years, all the counselors fanned out. We checked the bathrooms, the mess hall, the woods right by the beach. Nothing. Abernathy had come running down from the lodge, his face ashen, the cheerful mask gone completely. He looked terrified. And then Maya screamed. She was standing 50 yards down the shoreline, near a thicket of reeds, pointing, not at the water. She was pointing at the old boathouse. It was a dilapidated structure at the far end of the beach, half collapsing into the lake. Its wood was gray and splintered, and the sign above the door just said BOA. It was strictly off limits, boarded up and supposedly empty. But the door, which had been nailed shut, was hanging slightly ajar. We all ran towards it. I got there first, Abernathy right behind me. I ripped the door open. And there was Thomas. He was sitting in the middle of the floor, in a patch of dusty sunlight filtering through the grimy window. He was perfectly dry, his clothes, his hair, not a drop of water on him. In his hands, he was holding a small, intricately carved wooden bird. It was old, the wood dark and smooth with age. He was stroking it gently, humming to himself. It wasn't a song I recognized. It was a strange, meandering tune with no real melody. It was discordant and deeply unsettling. "Thomas," I cried out, a wave of relief so powerful it made me dizzy. "What are you doing in here? We were so worried." He looked up, his big eyes unfocused. He seemed surprised to see us. "Just looking," he said, his voice quiet. Abernathy pushed past me and knelt in front of the boy. "Where did you get that, son?" he asked, his voice shaken as he pointed at the wooden bird. Thomas looked down at his hands as if just noticing it. "She," he said simply. "She who?" I asked. Thomas looked past Abernathy, towards the darkest, most cobweb-choked corner of the boathouse. "The sad lady," he said, "the lady who waits." There was no one there. Abernathy snatched the wooden bird from Thomas's hand. He didn't say another word. He just grabbed the boy's arm, pulled him to his feet, and marched him out of the boathouse. His face was grim, his jaw set like stone. Later that afternoon, I saw him behind the lodge, smashing the wooden bird to splinters with a rock.
That night, things got worse. I couldn't sleep. The image of Thomas in the boathouse, the creepy little tune he was humming, Abernathy's sheer panic, it was all churning in my head. Liam was snoring like a chainsaw in the bunk across from me. I slipped out of the cabin, needing air. The camp was transformed at night. The familiar clearing was alien and menacing in the moonlight. Every shadow seemed to writhe with a life of its own. The silence was the worst part. It was a heavy, pressing silence, not the peaceful quiet of the country. The air was dead calm. Not a single leaf stirred. It felt like the whole world was underwater. I saw a light on in the arts and crafts cabin and walked towards it. Through the window, I could see Maya, hunched over a table, her sketchbook open. I tapped gently on the glass, and she jumped, startled. She unlocked the door and let me in. The cabin smelled of clay and turpentine. Canvases in various states of completion were propped against the walls. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked. "Not a chance," I said, pulling up a stool. "That thing with Thomas today, that was wrong," she finished for me. "It was all wrong. He wasn't wet, Alex. He was in the water one minute, and the next he's bone dry in a locked boathouse. And that tune he was humming? I know." She flipped a few pages in her sketchbook. She'd been drawing the boathouse, but in her drawing, the shadows in the corner weren't empty. A tall, thin figure was sketched there. A woman with long, dark hair covering her face. A woman made of shadows. "He said a sad lady gave him the bird," Maya whispered. "Abernathy knew what it was. That's why he destroyed it." She flipped the page again. This was a new drawing. It was a face. A boy's face, but his eyes were wrong. They were wide, terrified, and reflected in them was a distorted shape. She'd captured the expression on Thomas's face perfectly after Abernathy had taken the bird. "He's changed," Maya said. "Did you notice? He's quieter now. He doesn't draw anymore. He just sits." She was right. Since the incident, Thomas had been a ghost. He moved through the day's activities without a word, his eyes vacant. He wouldn't even look at the lake. "I think this camp has a history they're not telling us about," I said. "Abernathy's not just a quirky director. He's a warden. He's trying to keep something in, not just keep us safe." Maya reached into a portfolio and pulled out a large sheet of charcoal paper. It was a stunning, photorealistic drawing of the lake. But it was a view from high above, almost an aerial map. The lake was a central dark shape. Around it were the cabins, the lodge, the woods. And leading from the lake to various points in the camp, the old boathouse, cabin 7, the off-limits chapel on the hill, were thin, swirling lines like currents of darkness. "I dream about it," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Every night, I see this. It's like the lake is the heart, and it has veins. It's pumping something into the camp, something cold. We sat there in silence for a long time. The only sound, the faint hiss of the gas lamp on the table. The fear was a living thing in the room with us. It was no longer just a vague unease. It was solidifying, taking shape. The smiling sun on the camp logo was a lie. Something else lived at Wapakaka. Something old and sad and hungry.
The next week passed in a haze of forced normality. We organized a camp-wide Olympics with sack races and tug-of-war. Liam was in his element, a whirlwind of whistles and encouragement. We tried to make things fun for the kids, to plaster over the cracks that were starting to show. But the wrongness was always there, simmering under the surface. Little things. A set of keys would go missing from a counselor's pocket and reappear on the mantelpiece in the main lodge. Kids would wake up from nightmares, all describing the same thing, a tall woman with wet hair standing at the foot of their bed. Ben, the nature expert, came back from a hike one afternoon, pale and shaken. He said he'd found a clearing deep in the woods where all the trees were dead, their bark peeled away, and strange symbols were carved into the naked wood. He refused to take anyone to see it. And the humming, it started to spread. I first heard it again from one of the other boys in my cabin, the freckle kid, Josh. He was sweeping the floor, humming a tuneless, meandering little song under his breath. It was the same one Thomas had been humming in the boathouse. "Hey, where'd you learn that song?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He shrugged. "I don't know, just popped into my head." But then I heard it again. A girl from cabin 3 humming it while she was weaving a friendship bracelet. Then another boy by the archery range. It was like a virus spreading silently through the camp, a nonsensical tune that nobody knew they knew. Whenever you'd ask a kid about it, they'd just get a confused look on their face and say, "I don't know." Sarah, ever the pragmatist, tried to rationalize it. "It's like a yawn," she said one evening as a few of us sat on the lodge porch. "One kid hums a weird tune, another picks it up. It's nothing." But her voice lacked conviction. Her eyes kept strained to the darkening lake. Liam, however, was having none of it. "You guys are losing it," he said with a laugh. "It's a summer camp. They're just ghost stories. The sad lady of the lake. Come on, every camp has one. It's all just to scare the kids. Abernathy's probably loving it." "He didn't look like he was loving it when he found Thomas," I countered. "The kid was missing. Of course he was freaked out. You guys need to relax." His dismissal was infuriating, but a small part of me wanted him to be right. I wanted it all to be a product of our overactive imaginations, the spooky atmosphere of the Northwoods getting to us. That hope was shattered during the second-to-last week of camp. It was the night of the big camp-wide marshmallow roast. A massive bonfire was built in the main fire pit, and all 100 campers and the dozen counselors were gathered around it. Abernathy was even in a good mood, leading around a John Jacob Jingleheimer Schmidt with forced gusto. For a little while, it almost felt normal. It felt like the brochure. The kids were giddy, hyped up on sugar and excitement. After the songs from the approved songbook were exhausted, the kids started clamoring for scary stories. "Tell us a ghost story, Mr. A," one of them yelled. Abernathy's smile froze on his face. Now, let's stick to happy thoughts, shall we?" But Liam, ever the showman, jumped to his feet. "Oh, come on, Abernathy. A campfire's not a campfire without a good ghost story." He winked at the rest of us. He was going to prove how silly we were all being. "I've got one," he announced to the kids, who cheered wildly. Sarah shot at him a look that could have curdled milk, but Liam ignored it. He lowered his voice, holding a flashlight under his chin to create spooky shadows. "They say," he began, his voice a dramatic whisper, "that long ago, right here at this very camp, there was a counselor just like us. Her name was Eloise." Abernathy took a sharp, audible breath. I looked over at him. All the color had drained from his face. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. Liam, oblivious, continued his tale.
It was a generic story he was clearly making up on the spot, full of cliches about a jilted lover in a moonlit night. And she was so sad, so heartbroken, that she walked right into the lake and never came out. And they say that on nights just like this one, if you're very quiet, you can still hear her weeping. He made a goofy woo sound, and some of the younger kids giggled nervously. But then, something else happened. From the circle of kids, a small voice started to hum. It was that tune, that discordant, aimless melody. Then another voice joined in, and another. Within seconds, half the kids were humming it, not loudly, but in a soft, eerie, monotonous chorus. Their faces were blank, their eyes staring into the fire, but not really seeing it. The other counselors and I looked at each other, our blood turning to ice. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't a silly song they'd picked up. This was something else entirely. The humming grew, a strange, buzzing harmony that seemed to vibrate in my teeth. It drowned out the crackling of the fire. It drowned out the crickets. It was the only sound in the world. Liam's confident smirk had vanished. He was staring at the humming children, his face a mask of confusion and dawning horror. "Okay, guys, very funny," he said, his voice unsteady. "Knock it off." They didn't stop. They just kept humming, their bodies swaying slightly in unison. And then Thomas, silent, ghostly Thomas, who hadn't said more than 2 words in a week, spoke. His voice was clear and cold, cutting through the humming. "You shouldn't say her name," he said, his eyes fixed on Liam. "She doesn't like it when you say her name." The humming stopped. Abruptly. The sudden silence was more shocking than the sound had been. Every child's head turned, as if on a single pivot, to stare at Liam. 100 pairs of eyes, all fixed on him. And in the firelight, their expressions weren't childlike. They were ancient and cold and filled with a terrible, knowing emptiness. Abernathy finally snapped out of his stupor. "All right, that's enough. Marshmallow roast is over. Everyone back to your cabins, now!" he shrieked, his voice cracking with sheer panic. He began shooing the kids away from the fire, his movements frantic. The other counselors and I scrambled to our feet, herding our dazed-looking cabin members away from the fire and back towards their bunks. The spell, whatever it was, seemed to be broken. The kids were just kids again, chattering and complaining about the abrupt end to the party. They didn't seem to remember what had just happened, but we did. We would never forget it. I got my cabin back and into their beds. Thomas was silent, his back to me. I didn't know what to say to him. I was terrified of him. Later, I saw a small group of counselors gathered outside the main lodge, their voices low and urgent. Sarah, Maya, Ben, and me. Liam was there too. He wasn't joking anymore. He was pale and trembling, leaning against a porch post. "What the hell was that?" he kept muttering. "What the hell was that?" "It's the lady," Maya said, her voice shaking. She was holding her sketchbook so tightly her knuckles were white. "The one from the boathouse. The one Thomas warned you about. Eloise." "How did they all know to do that?" I asked. "How did they all know that song?" "It's not a song," Ben said, pushing his glasses up his nose. His forte was botany, not ghosts, but his analytical mind was racing. "It's a frequency, a signal. Something is broadcasting it, and the kids are receptive." He gestured vaguely towards the lake, shimmering under the moonlight. "This is insane," Liam whispered, shaking his head. "This can't be real." "Open your eyes, Liam," Sarah snapped, her voice sharp with fear and frustration. "Look around. This place is wrong. Abernathy knows it. He's been trying to put a lid on it all summer, but it's boiling over.
You saying her name tonight, you might have just ripped the lid off completely." Just then, the door to the lodge creaked open and Abernathy stepped out. He looked 100 years old. His face was a gray, crumpled mess of despair. "You stupid, arrogant boy," he hissed at Liam, his voice trembling with a terrifying mixture of rage and fear. "What did you do? What did you do?" I was just telling a story," Liam stammered. "You said the name," Abernathy whispered, his eyes wide and wild. "I have spent 30 years here, 30 years keeping things quiet, keeping her quiet. We have rules for a reason. We don't talk about her. We don't say her name. We don't sing her songs. We let her sleep." He took a step closer, his eyes boring into Liam's. "You don't tell a ghost story about a real ghost." "She's real," Maya breathed.
Abernathy let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. It was a horrible sound. Real? Oh, she's real. She was a camper here, back in the 40s. A sad, lonely little girl named Eloise. The other children were cruel to her. They'd mock her, steal her things. They made up a nasty little song about her. My blood ran cold. The humming. It wasn't her song. It was the song they sang about her. One night, Abernathy continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. During a thunderstorm, they dared her to swim out to the old diving platform. They were taunting her, singing their vicious little song. So she did it, to prove she was brave. There was a flash of lightning, and she was gone. They found her body 2 days later, tangled in the weeds at the bottom of the lake. He paused, taking a ragged breath. The air around us felt thick, heavy with the weight of his words. But she didn't leave. Her misery, it soaked into this place, into the water, into the woods. She's a memory that can't forget. She's lonely, and she wants friends. His eyes scanned our faces. She takes them. Every few years, she takes one, a child, never a counselor, until now. "What do you mean, until now?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. Abernathy's gaze settled on Liam again, and it was filled with a chilling, pitying terror. "She's awake now. You woke her up, and you said her name. You've invited her in." He raised a shaking finger and pointed at Liam. "She's noticed you, and now she's going to want to play." A profound, bottomless silence fell over our little group, the kind of silence that feels like a physical presence. The crickets were gone, the wind was gone. All that was left was the vast, dark emptiness of the Wisconsin night and the terrifying knowledge of what it held. Liam stared at Abernathy, his face a canvas of pure, undiluted fear. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. From across the lake, faint and clear in the dead air, came a sound. It was the sound of a little girl humming, a sad, tuneless, meandering song, and it was coming from the direction of the old, abandoned boathouse. The following day was thick with an unspoken tension. Abernathy canceled all water-based activities, citing a bogus algae bloom in the lake. He walked around the camp like a zombie, his eyes red-rimmed and constantly scanning the shoreline. The kids were restless and irritable, cooped up in the clearing. The humming had stopped, but the silence it left behind was somehow worse. It was an expectant silence. Liam was a wreck. He stuck close to the other counselors, never going anywhere alone. He'd lost all his bravado. He looked smaller, haunted. He kept looking at the lake, then quickly looking away, as if he was afraid of what he might see looking back. Maya, Ben, Sarah, and I formed a tight, anxious knot. We felt like the only sane people in a world that had tilted off its axis.
We tried to piece it all together from Abernathy's terrifying confession. So this Eloise, she's a ghost, a spirit, whatever, and she's tied to the lake. I theorized, trying to apply some logic to the illogical. We were sitting at a picnic table, ostensibly supervising a game of kickball that had no energy. More than that, Ben said, cleaning his glasses with the hem of his shirt. Abernathy said she soaked into the place. That's a very specific phrase. In folklore, they're called a genius loci, a spirit of a place. But this one is corrupted, fueled by a specific emotion, misery, loneliness. And she takes the kids? Sarah said, shuddering. What does that mean? Like she drowns them? Maybe not physically, Maya chimed in, her voice low. She was sketching furiously in her book, her charcoal pencil flying across the page. Look at Thomas. She took him in the boathouse, but she gave him back. But he came back empty, like she took something from him. His spark, his joy. We all looked over at Thomas, who was sitting on the steps of his cabin, staring at his shoes. He hadn't moved in an hour. She feeds on it, Maya whispered, her eyes wide with a terrible understanding. She feeds on happiness. She held up her sketchbook. She had drawn the lake again, but this time the dark swirls she'd drawn before weren't just coming from the lake. They were flowing into it from the figures of the children, little streams of light being pulled from their chests into the dark water. That's why she wants friends. She wants playmates. She drains them until they're as sad and empty as she is.
A cold dread washed over me. We were shepherds of 100 little souls, and there was a predator in the water, a predator made of sadness. But Abernathy said she's never taken a counselor before, I said, my eyes drifting to Liam, who was fumbling with a kickball, his movements clumsy and uncoordinated. He said Liam invited her in. By saying her name, Sarah confirmed. It's like he broke a rule of the supernatural world. He acknowledged her directly. He made himself visible to her on a personal level. So what's she gonna do to him? Liam asked, walking over to our table. He'd overheard us. His voice was a pathetic, cracking whisper. What does she want? No one had an answer. The day crawled by, each hour a year long. As dusk began to settle, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and orange, the anxiety in the camp became a palpable thing. Abernathy announced that all staff and campers were to be in their cabins and locked in by 8 p.m., 2 hours earlier than the usual curfew. He didn't offer an explanation. He didn't have to. I got my kids into cabin 7, did a final head count, and locked the door. The boys were subdued, spooked by the strange atmosphere. They got into their bunks without the usual fighting and noise. I sat on my own bunk, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Liam was in the bunk across from me, curled into a fetal position, facing the wall. Ben was sitting at the small wooden table, trying to read a book by the light of a battery-powered lantern, but his eyes weren't moving across the page. Outside, the world went silent. The cicadas, the frogs, the crickets, they all stopped. It was the same dead, profound silence from the night before. The silence of a predator in the grass. Hours passed. I must have drifted into a light, uneasy sleep because I was jolted awake by a sound. A soft, scraping sound. It was coming from outside the cabin door. Scrape, scrape, scrape. It sounded like a fingernail dragging slowly down the wood. Ben and I locked eyes across the room, his face illuminated by the faint glow of the lantern. His expression was one of pure terror. Even Liam, who had been feigning sleep, was bolt upright, his breath held. Scrape, scrape, scrape. It went on for what felt like an eternity, a slow, deliberate, exploratory sound. Then it stopped. A heavy silence descended again.
I could hear my own blood roaring in my ears. And then a voice, a little girl's voice, right outside our door. It was a thin, watery whisper, like it was being spoken through a mouthful of lake water. "Liam," it whispered. "Liam." Liam let out a choked, terrified sob. He pulled his blanket over his head like a little kid. "Don't answer," I mouthed to him, my own voice trapped in my throat. "I know you're in there, Liam," the voice whispered again, closer this time, right at the keyhole. "I heard you talking about me. That's not a very nice story. Don't you want to hear the real story?" Tap, tap, tap. Tiny, delicate knocks on the door. Not the sound of a fist, but of a single, bony knuckle. "Let me in, Liam. I'm lonely. I want to play a game." Liam started whimpering, rocking back and forth under his blanket. "Make her go away," he cried, his voice muffled. "Make her go away." "I have a new song for you, Liam," the whispery voice cooed. "It's a very special song. It's about a boy who goes for a swim in the dark. A boy who never comes back. Do you want to learn it?" The doorknob began to jiggle, slowly at first, then more violently. The old wood of the doorframe groaned. The lock was a cheap, simple thing. It wouldn't hold for long. Jiggle, jiggle, rattle! Ben scrambled backwards, knocking over his stool with a crash. The boys in the bunks were awake now, whimpering in fear. "She can't get in," I said, trying to convince myself as much as anyone else. "The door is locked." As soon as the words left my mouth, the rattling stopped. Silence again. My heart hammered. Was she gone? Then a new sound. A wet, dripping sound. Drip, drip, drip. It wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from the middle of the room. I looked down from my bunk. On the wooden floorboards, directly in the center of the cabin, a small, dark puddle was forming. Water was seeping up from between the planks. Dark, murky, weed-choked lake water. The puddle grew, spreading like a black stain, and the air filled with the stench of rot and decay.
From the center of the pool, something began to rise. Not a person, not yet. Just a shape. A column of darkness made of shimmering, filthy water and tangled weeds. It twisted and solidified, and slowly, horribly, it took the form of a young girl. She was maybe 10 years old, with a pale, bloated face and skin the color of river mud. Her dress was a tattered, old-fashioned thing from the 1940s, heavy and dark with water. Her hair was long and black, plastered to her face, tangled with slime and pieces of lakeweed. And her eyes were the worst part. They were wide, black, bottomless pits of ancient sorrow and terrifying malice. She was standing in the middle of our locked cabin. She hadn't opened the door. She had just come in. She turned her head, a slow, creaking movement, and her dead, black eyes fixed on Liam's bunk. "There you are," Eloise whispered, and her voice was no longer outside the door. It was inside our heads. It was a cold, wet thought that didn't belong to us. "I found you." Liam screamed. It wasn't a yell of defiance. It was a raw, primal shriek of a soul breaking apart. He threw off his blanket and scrambled out of his bunk, trying to get away, but there was nowhere to go. He backed into the corner of the cabin, his limbs flailing. The spirit of Eloise glided towards him, her feet not touching the floor. The puddle of filthy water followed her, a slug trail of pure misery. "Don't be scared," she whispered in our minds, a chilling, insane parody of comfort. "We're going to be the best of friends."
She reached out a pale, wrinkled, waterlogged hand. The other counselors and I were frozen, paralyzed by a fear so absolute it was like our nervous systems had shut down. We couldn't move. We couldn't scream. We could only watch. Her fingers, impossibly long and thin, touched Liam's chest. He gasped. All the color drained from his face. His eyes, which had been wide with terror, went slack and empty. A faint, shimmering light, like heat haze, seemed to be pulled from his body, flowing into her outstretched fingers. He was a vibrant, athletic, life-loving person one second, and the next, he was a husk. The light in his eyes went out. His strong, muscular body seemed to deflate, his shoulders slumping. A look of profound, bottomless despair settled on his features. It was a look I recognized. It was the same hollowed-out expression I'd seen on Thomas's face. Eloise smiled. It was a gruesome sight, a splitting of gray lips to reveal blackened, mossy teeth. "Much better," she whispered inside our skulls. "Now you're sad, just like me." She retracted her hand. Liam didn't collapse. He just stood there, vacant and still. Eloise turned her gaze, sweeping it across the rest of us. Her black, empty eyes lingered on me, on Ben, on the terrified faces of the little boys peering down from their bunks. For a moment, I thought she was going to choose another one, that we would all be left as empty shells in a locked cabin. But then, she seemed to lose interest. Her form flickered like a bad television signal. With a final, sorrowful sigh that sounded like the tide going out, she dissolved. The column of water and weeds collapsed, splashing onto the floorboards, and then, impossibly, the puddle receded, soaking back down between the planks until the floor was just damp. And she was gone. Liam was still standing in the corner, silent, unmoving. The spell was broken. Ben let out a ragged gasp and scrambled to his feet. I jumped down from my bunk, my legs shaking so badly I almost fell. The little boys in the cabin started to cry, soft, terrified sobs. "Liam," I said, my voice a croak. "Liam, are you okay?" He didn't respond. I walked over to him, my feet leaden. I put a hand on his shoulder. It was cold, clammy. I turned him around to face me. His face was a blank mask. His eyes, usually so full of life and mischief, were dull and gray, like stones at the bottom of a river. He looked at me, but he didn't see me. There was nothing behind his eyes. Absolutely nothing. The vibrant, loud, life-of-the-party jock was gone. In his place was this thing, this quiet, empty vessel. The rest of that night is a blur of pure panic. We didn't dare unlock the door until the sun came up. Ben and I sat with the crying children, trying to offer reassurances we didn't feel. Liam just stood in the corner, a silent statue of despair. When the first rays of dawn pierced the grimy cabin window, I unbolted the door and stumbled outside. The world looked obscenely normal. The sun was shining, birds were chirping, and the air was fresh and clean. It felt like a personal insult. I ran to the main lodge, hammered on Abernathy's door until he opened it. I didn't have to say a word. He saw my face, and he knew. The official story, the one Abernathy concocted with a chilling efficiency born of long practice, was that Liam had suffered a sudden and severe psychotic break. An ambulance was called from the nearest town, an hour away. The paramedics were met with a calm, compliant, and utterly unresponsive young man. They sedated him and took him away. I never saw him again. I heard, months later, that he was in a long-term care facility, diagnosed with a rare form of catatonic schizophrenia. His parents refused to believe the camp story, but they had no other explanation. How could they? The camp was shut down. Abernathy told the parents who came to pick up their children that there had been an outbreak of a contagious virus. It was a flurry of organized chaos. Parents were worried, kids were confused. Within 24 hours, Camp Wapaka was empty. It was just us counselors, Abernathy, and the ghosts. We packed our things in a grim, shell-shocked silence. No one talked about what we'd seen. There were no words for it. How do you explain that your friend's soul was stolen by a 100-year-old ghost made of lake water? Before I left, I found Maya sitting on the steps of the arts and crafts cabin, her sketchbook open on her lap. She was staring out at the lake, which lay placid and beautiful in the afternoon sun, a perfect picture of innocence. "She's not going to let us go, is she?" Maya said without looking at me. "What do you mean?" I asked, though I already knew. She turned a page in her sketchbook. She had drawn all of us, all the counselors, me, Sarah, Ben, the others, and Liam. Our faces were rendered in her typical, stunningly realistic detail. But behind each of our heads, she had drawn a faint, dark, watery hand, its fingers resting on the back of our necks, a mark. "She touched all of us that night," Maya whispered, "not just Liam. When she was in the cabin, she was in our heads. She marked us. She knows who we are now." I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the cabin window. I looked tired, scared. But was there something else there? A shadow in my eyes that hadn't been there before? A touch of the same emptiness I'd seen in Liam? My last conversation was with Abernathy. I found him in the camp office, packing old files into a cardboard box. He looked defeated, a man hollowed out by a lifetime of fighting a battle he could never win. "What happens now?" I asked him. He sighed, a long, weary sound. He didn't pretend not to understand. Now I try to sell this cursed piece of land. And I pray to a God I stopped believing in 30 years ago that whoever buys it has the good sense to bulldoze it all and salt the earth." "And her?" I asked. "Eloise?" He stopped packing and looked at me, his pale eyes full of a grim certainty. "She'll wait. She's very good at waiting. She's been doing it for a long time. Eventually, someone new will come. New children, new songs. It'll all happen again." He picked up a dusty trophy from a shelf. "Camp Wapaka, Best Archery, 1978. He stared at it for a moment, then dropped it into the trash can with a hollow thud. "Get out of here, Alex," he said, not unkindly. "Go home. Try to forget this place. Go live your life. And whatever you do, don't ever come back to the Northwoods." I took his advice. I drove out of Camp Wapaka and didn't look back. I sped through the green tunnel of trees, desperate for highways, for cell service, for the noise and smog of civilization. I wanted to forget the oppressive silence, the smell of the lake, and the feeling of a little girl's voice inside my head. For a while, I thought I'd succeeded. I finished my degree. I got a boring but stable job in accounting. I met a woman, got married, had a daughter. I built a life on a foundation of mundane reality, a wall of numbers and spreadsheets to keep the memories at bay. But the cracks started to show.
Sarah, the sharp pre-med student, dropped out of school a year after the camp. The last I heard, she was living in a halfway house in Oregon, battling severe depression and anxiety. She told her therapist about Wapaka, and they diagnosed her with delusional paranoia. Ben, the quiet nature lover, became a recluse. He moved to the middle of the Arizona desert, as far away from lakes and forests as he could get. He works from home, communicates only by email. He refuses to talk on the phone. He says he's afraid of what he might hear on the other end of the line. And Maya, beautiful, talented Maya. She stopped drawing. She said she couldn't stand the feel of a pencil in her hand anymore. She said that sometimes when she looked at a blank piece of paper, she could see the face of Eloise staring back at her from the empty white space. She broke off our long-distance relationship a couple of years after that summer. She said she felt like she was cursed and she didn't want to drag me down with her. The mark, the watery hand on the back of our necks, it was real. Eloise hadn't just drained Liam, she'd planted a seed of her own misery in all of us, a little piece of the cold, dark lake to carry with us forever. It gnaws away at you, slowly, over the years. It dulls the bright colors of the world. It makes you flinch at sudden noises. It makes you afraid of the dark. I've fought it. I have my family. My daughter, Chloe, she's the sun in my life. She's 8 years old now, full of laughter and light. I try to keep my darkness away from her, to build a wall around her so thick that no whisper from a Wisconsin lake can ever reach her. But a few weeks ago, something happened. It was late. I was up, unable to sleep, a common occurrence these days. I was staring out the window at the city lights when I heard a sound from down the hall. It was Chloe, talking in her sleep, mumbling things, the way kids do. I smiled. I went to her room just to check on her, to pull her blanket up. The door was slightly ajar. I stood in the doorway, listening. She was humming. A soft, quiet, aimless little tune. A discordant melody with no beginning and no end. A song she couldn't possibly know. The song that the children of Wapaka sang 60 years ago to mock a sad, lonely little girl. I felt the blood drained from my face. The floor seemed to drop out from under me. The sounds of the city outside my window faded away, replaced by a heavy, pressing silence. And beneath that silence, I could hear it. The gentle lapping of water against a rotting pier. The smell of pine and decay. I pushed her door open. She was asleep in her bed, her face peaceful in the glow of her nightlight. But the humming continued, soft and clear in the quiet room. And I realized, with a surge of terror so pure and absolute it almost stopped my heart, that the humming wasn't coming from her mouth. It was coming from the darkness under her bed. I stood there, frozen in the doorway, for what felt like a lifetime. The man who ran from Wapaka 20 years ago would have slammed the door and run away. He would have hidden, just like he'd been hiding his whole adult life. But I'm not that 19-year-old kid anymore. I'm a father. And the thing in the dark, the sad, lonely thing that had followed me for 2 decades, had finally made a mistake. It had overplayed its hand. It had come from my daughter. The fear was still there. It was a cold iron knot in my stomach. But something else rose to meet it. A hot, savage fury I didn't know I possessed. The protective rage of a parent. Eloise wanted to play? Fine. This time, we'd play by my rules. I didn't run. I took a deep breath, the air rattling in my lungs, and I took a step into the room. I walked past my humming, sleeping daughter. I knelt down, my knees cracking in the silence, and I looked into the darkness under the bed. I couldn't see anything at first, just the familiar shapes of forgotten toys and dust bunnies. But I could feel it, a cold spot in the air, a palpable aura of misery and ancient grief. "I know you're there," I whispered, my voice shaking but firm. For a long moment, there was nothing. The humming stopped. Then, from the deepest shadows, 2 points of light appeared. Not reflections. They were points of blackness that seemed to absorb the light. Her eyes. "You came back," her voice whispered in my head. It was older now, colder, less like a little girl and more like the ancient, hungry thing she had become. "I've missed you, Alex. I've missed all my friends." "I'm not your friend," I said, forcing the words out, "and you will not touch my daughter." A cold amusement trickled through my mind. It was her laughter. "You can't stop me. You carry my mark. I can always find you. I can find anyone you love. I can touch anyone I want."
The shadows under the bed seemed to deepen, to coalesce. I could almost make out her pale, bloated face, her stringy, wet hair. The smell of stagnant water filled the room. My daughter stirred in her sleep, whimpering. The fury inside me burned hotter. I thought about Liam, his empty eyes. I thought about Sarah, lost in her paranoia. I thought about Maya, her artistic soul silenced. I thought about the life this thing had stolen from us, the long, slow poisoning of our happiness. And I thought about Abernathy. You don't tell a ghost story about a real ghost. He was wrong. That was a rule for the hunted, for the victims. But maybe, just maybe, there was another way. You don't just tell the story, you finish it. You're lonely, aren't you? I asked, the question taking shape in my mind before I even knew I was going to say it. The raw, primal rage was still there, but a strange, cold clarity was settling over me. That's what this is all about. You were lonely then, and you're lonely now. You pull people into your misery because you don't know how to be anything else. The presence under the bed was still. The amusement was gone, replaced by a flicker of something else. Confusion. They were cruel, she whispered, and for the first time, the voice held a trace of the little girl she once was, a raw, wounded note. They laughed. They sang. I know, I said softly. What they did to you was wrong, horrible. No child should ever have to go through that. My heart was hammering. My body was screaming at me to run. But I held my ground, my eyes locked on the 2 points of darkness. But Liam wasn't one of them, I continued. Thomas wasn't one of them. These children, my daughter, they have nothing to do with what happened to you. Can't you see that? You've become the thing you hated, a bully. You're scaring lonely children in the dark. You're no better than they were. A violent tremor of rage shot through my mind. The bed frame rattled. A book fell off Chloe's nightstand. "Silence!" the voice shrieked in my head. "You know nothing!" "I know you're in pain," I pushed on, my voice gaining strength. "But making everyone else as miserable as you are, it's not going to fix you. It's not going to bring you peace. It's just an endless, empty circle. Don't you ever get tired of being sad?" The 2 black eyes stared at me. The rage subsided, leaving behind a vast, hollow emptiness. For the first time, I didn't just feel her malice. I felt the crushing weight of her eternal, unchanging sorrow. 60 years of it. It was a weight that could shatter mountains. "What else is there?" the voice asked, a faint, lost whisper from across a sea of time. And that's when I knew what I had to do. The idea was insane. It was a desperate, foolish gamble. It could get me killed. It could get my daughter killed. But it was the only thing I had left. "Let me show you," I said. I reached out my hand, palm up, towards the darkness under the bed. "Let me help you." A wave of pure shock and disbelief radiated from the presence. "Help? Me? You don't have to be alone anymore," I said, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. Pity? Empathy? But you have to let go. Let go of the anger. Let go of the lake. Let go of the camp. I thought of my daughter, sleeping peacefully, a beacon of warmth and light in the cold room. I channeled every happy memory I had. Her first steps, her first word, the feeling of her small hand in mine. I pushed it all outwards, a shield of light against her crushing darkness. "There's another way," I whispered. "There's peace." The dark shape under the bed recoiled as if I'd struck it. The memory of happiness was anathema to it, a burning fire. "No!" she shrieked. "Lies! There is only the cold. There is only the dark." The room grew cold, so cold I could see my breath. A fine layer of frost began to creep across the window pane. Chloe cried out in her sleep, a sharp, terrified sound. This was it, the breaking point. "Then take me!"
I said, my voice ringing with a terrifying resolve. Leave her alone. Leave all of them alone. Take me instead. You want a friend? Fine. But you get me, all of me, my happiness, my sadness, my memories, everything. But you have to promise to let them go. You have to break the curse. It was the ultimate gamble, offering my own soul to save my daughters. The presence under the bed was utterly still. I could feel its ancient, lonely mind considering my offer. The sheer audacity of it, the raw, desperate power of a father's love. It was a force she had never encountered. Her entire existence was built on misery, cruelty, and fear. Love was a foreign concept, a variable she couldn't account for. "You would do that?" the voice whispered, the malice replaced by a profound cosmic confusion. "Why?" "Because that's what love is," I said simply. My hand was still outstretched, trembling in the icy air. You give yourself to protect the ones you care about. It's not about taking, it's about giving. I saw it then, a flicker. Deep within the two black pits of her eyes, a tiny, microscopic pinpoint of light appeared. A memory? An echo of the little girl she had been before the cruelty of others had drowned her. A single, solitary tear, not of water, but of pure, distilled sorrow, leaped from the corner of one of her eyes and sizzled on the floorboards like a drop of acid. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, it was over. The cold receded. The presence under the bed dissolved, not with a whisper or a sigh, but with a feeling of release, a loosening of a knot that had been tied for 60 years. The air in the room warmed, and the oppressive weight that had been pressing down on me lifted. I stayed there, kneeling on the floor for a long time, my heart pounding, my body shaking with the adrenaline of a battle fought and won in a realm of shadows and whispers. I pulled my hand back. It was freezing cold, but it was my own. Eventually, I got to my feet. I walked over to my daughter's bed. She had stopped humming. Her breathing was deep and regular. She was safe. I leaned down and kissed her forehead. It was warm, full of life. I walked out of her room and closed the door softly behind me. I went to the window in my own room and looked out at the city. It was the same city, the same lights, but something was different. The mark on the back of my neck, the cold spot I had carried with me for 20 years, the little piece of Wapaka Lake that had lived under my skin, it was gone. I felt lighter. I don't know what happened to Eloise. I don't know if I set her free or if she simply chose to let go. Maybe, in the end, after 60 years of lonely rage, the offer of a hand, not in fear but in pity, was something she couldn't fight. Maybe a single act of selfless love was the one thing that could finally silence the cruel songs of the past. The world is still a place with darkness in it. I know that now more than ever. But I also know that the darkness isn't all-powerful. I know that a father's love for his child can be a light bright enough to stare down a ghost. I know that some wounds, the deepest, most festering wounds, can heal. Not with time, but with courage, with sacrifice, with a love that says, "Take me instead." I still get a whiff of a pine air freshener sometimes. It still reminds me of the woods. It still reminds me of the lake. But it doesn't scare me anymore. It's just a memory now, a story that has finally, mercifully found its end. The whispers have stopped. The water is still. And my daughter is sleeping, safe in her bed, dreaming her own happy, sunlit dreams. And that is all that matters.